The images of 2020 are unforgettable. Yet, in the midst of all that has happened, there is truth to be found for us as human beings. To help shed some light on this, we're privileged to bring back Hall of Fame coach Tony Dungy, along with former Super Bowl champion Benjamin Watson and Indianapolis Colts coach Frank Reich, who will join James Brown to share their perspectives on the state of race and justice in America. JB.
Akbar, thank you so very much. And what a very fitting lead in to this segment here that I have with three outstanding men who are great men of character, integrity, and of course, accomplishment as well. Tony, share with all of us what it is your father faced when he came back home, having put his life on the line for this country and had a doctorate degree. Take the story from there before I move to the others.
Yeah, I didn't know all of the things my dad went through. He shared some things that he thought would be helpful to us, but he, as a young man, 18 years old, enlisted in the service at the end of World War II. He wanted to help the country. He wanted to fly and be an airman. That's what he was interested in. The Air Force at that time was segregated, so he couldn't join in the main Air Force. He went to Tuskegee, Alabama, and joined a segregated group called the Tuskegee Airmen. And he flew with them until the war was over, came back after World War II, went to the University of Michigan, got his degree in zoology and biology, and he, at that time, he wanted to teach, and he felt his calling was to help young people learn. So he went to Washington, D.C. to exercise that, and he just felt like that's where the Lord was taking him. He got to Washington, D.C. and didn't realize he would not be able to teach in integrated schools. He would have to teach at the all-black high school in Arlington, Virginia. And to get to that high school, he wasn't allowed to ride in certain places on the bus. So he told me, rather than do that and suffer that indignity, I would walk. I walked past the all-white high school to the all-black high school, and my goal was to make sure that those students knew as much science as anybody else. That's how I could make the situation better. And I remember saying, Dad, weren't you upset? You fought for the country, you flew for the country, you came back, and now you aren't allowed to teach, even though you have a degree. You aren't allowed to ride in the bus in certain segments of the bus. How could you do that? And he said, well, the way I got through it was realizing I needed to make the situation better. There was a lot of things I could do, but the one thing I knew that would make the situation better was make sure those African American students knew more about science than anyone else. And that's the way he approached it. And that kind of sunk in. It took a long time for that to sink into me, that it's easy to lash out. It's easy to say this is wrong. It's easy to say we should do this, this, and this. But thinking about it and saying, what can I really do to make the situation better? That's always a good course, and that's what I tried to do for the rest of my life.
Benjamin, also, would you address, do you think we're making any progress hearing each other?
I think we are making progress. The question is the progress fast enough? And I think that, when you look at the words of Martin Luther King, or you look at the words of Frederick Douglass, there's always this sentiment that change doesn't come unless there's pressure. And things don't usually happen fast enough. How long should we wait? How long is too long? What are the cogs that need to be in motion to get the change that we want? When we're in our own silos, our own echo chambers, all we hear are things that reinforce what we believe. But when we're able to get outside of that and take a chance and have a conversation with someone and challenge respectfully, many times we see another point of view. It's not only like that with this situation, but with myriad others. These things that we talk about that were a long time ago weren't that long ago. A lot of times in our historical perspective, we are very, very nearsighted.
And Coach Frank Reich, how challenging was it for you as a head coach in the early part of the season to step forward, take a knee with your players during the anthem, knowing that there's some deep-seated, indeed divisive attitudes about how that is viewed? Walk us through your thought process.
We wanted to make a symbolic gesture that would demonstrate maybe how to make things better. And that symbolic gesture really took twofold. You know, the first was, you know, when the anthem started to play, we all stood in line. And as the head coach, I stood at the 50-yard line with the team on either side, JB. And then when the anthem started to play, I stepped forward. That was the first symbolic gesture. That stepping forward was a gesture of, it's going to take all of us to step forward in courage, to listen, to learn, to take action, and to demonstrate justice. But the second part of that gesture was then I not only stepped forward, but I took a knee. And while the rest of the team stood and locked arms to signal unity and strength. But the taking of a knee, and we talked a lot about this as a team, it was not a posture of defiance. It was not a posture of defiance. It was a posture of humility. We want to take a knee in a posture of humility to listen and to learn and to figure out what are the steps that we can take to make things better. We know the issue isn't easy. We know it's very complex, but we just decided as a team that no action was no longer going to be acceptable, that we weren't going to be silent, we weren't going to be passive, and we weren't going to be neutral. The last thing in the world we wanted to do was to offend the military or anybody in uniform. This was never about protesting the flag. This was not about protesting the anthem. So rather than protesting the flag or the anthem, it was the exact opposite. It was like, we love being American, and the ideals of being American is that equality should be present for all. The reason that I took a knee as a white man was so many times it's the black man who has to have that conversation with the white person. And as a white person kneeling, part of that response was to say, hey, it's time for us to listen, lament, and have those conversations. The conversations that I have had, like Ben has had with so many of my white friends, real meaningful conversations about, are you going to take a knee before the season started? Are you going to take a knee? Why? Having a chance to talk through those issues with so many white leaders that I know from all over this country, part of what we did was to demonstrate that as white America, we need to be willing to have those hard conversations with each other. That's a very important part of the process, I believe.
Coach, as Coach Dungy, as a man of faith, why do you think the approach that we're taking with this is the right approach to confront these things head on?
I really believe you have to hit any problem that you have head on. If you don't, you're never going to solve it. And I love to go back to what Benjamin and Frank were saying. Many people in America today say we've got to have conversations about this, but having conversations is not enough. As both of these guys said, we have to listen, we have to share our experience, and then we have to think about it. We have to take it in and then respond. It's easy to have a conversation and just tell you what I think. You tell me what you think, and I respond. But can I really hear from you? Can I process it and say, oh, I never thought of it that way? We've got to hear, and then we've got to develop a response and make the situation better.
You know, Benjamin, I know that you are involved with the International Justice Mission. Talk about how that influenced you in light of this.
Some time ago, we were made aware of IJM through another organization that we're a part of. And a few years went by, and we kept hearing about IJM and their work combating human trafficking, sex trafficking. And a couple years ago, we decided to go to Dominican Republic. And there was a little girl named Sophia. This young girl had been abused, I believe, by a family member. So I have a chance to meet her. And immediately I saw my daughter. My daughter was about her age, and at that point it just became real. And I looked at my wife and I started crying. And I don't do that too often, but I started crying, and I felt like I just couldn't stop crying because I was imagining the evil that someone had done to this precious child that's just like my daughter. How could I not advocate for her? How could I not stand up for an organization that I know is making sure that these crimes cease to exist against anyone, against the poor, but namely against our children? So if you're sitting there and you want to be involved and you've heard these things before, but you don't know quite where to go or what organization to get involved with, I encourage you to look into IJM.
So, Frank, on this issue that Benjamin spoke passionately about of justice, give me your thoughts. Coach Reich, what can we do?
When it comes to the area of race and justice, the difference is because we're finite human beings, as a white man, I cannot take on black flesh. I'll never know what it's like to be a black man. I'll never know what it's like to face the oppression and the injustice that a black man or woman has to take on. But what can I demonstrate? In some ways, as Christians, we can still model the humility that Christ demonstrated. I believe that's what the Bible calls us to demonstrate. Demonstrate the humility, as Coach was alluding to earlier, to not just listen, but to learn, and not just learn, but to be moved out of humility to action, to serve. To be humble is to serve others. And so in that way, we can follow Christ's lead in this area of race and justice. That's how I believe it in one very particular way that it informs us.
And in the area of justice, prison work, if you will, I know that Coach Dungy got intimately involved when he was the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Help us understand what are the keys to change relative to justice and inequity in the justice system.
Well, first of all, I think, as Benjamin said, we have to have the heart of God. We have to want that same type of justice that God wants, and we have to want it for not just ourselves, but for everybody. And Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And we can't say, well, it doesn't affect me, so I'm not going to worry about it. That's not a Christ-like attitude. Jesus would say, no, if it affects my brother, if it affects the least of one of these, I should be concerned and I should step forward and do what I can.
What opportunity do we have before us to make an impact? What can individuals do? Let me start with you, Coach Reich, and then go to Ben and Coach. Coach Reich, what can we do?
I mean, love. We got to serve. We got to listen, and we got to serve. And it takes, and love takes courage. Love takes courage. And let's, I have to preach to myself every day to exercise unconditional love, not expecting anything in return. Can we truly love somebody else without expecting something in return? It's a challenge. It's a challenge to each one of us. But I believe that's what we're called to do.
Benjamin?
Learn about this issue. A lot of stuff doesn't get taught to us over the course of our lives in school. How do we get to a place where all these things are happening in our cities and in the country? Where did that come from? And then, as you said, JB, it comes to loving. But love is an action. Some people you're not going to like, but you got to love them. Love is a verb. And when you love someone, you will seek the best for that person. And that's when, as individuals, but also as a country collectively, we'll know what legislation we need to pass. We'll know what conversations we need to have. We'll know who we need to apologize to on all sides of this. We'll know a place where God wants us to move and start over. We'll know where he wants us to go get involved with a certain ministry or send our money or our talent or our time, spend it in different places. We'll know those things when we truly, truly love people.